Hey guys, and welcome back to Betwixt the Books. It's Michaela here with a solo video that has been 10 months in the making. I'm not kidding you. I read the first book for this discussion back in January, and I am posting this in October. This was supposed to go up on October 1st to sort of kick off spooky season, but I was sort of dragging my feet along the last book. It took me like 3-ish weeks to finish it. That's the only reason. Definitely nothing else would have distracted me in that time period. But I'm here. I have it. I'm here today to talk about some of the best of horror of 2024. I'm reading through some of the Goodreads Choice Awards of horror of last year. Now, I am very much aware that Goodreads Choice is more or less a popularity award. The book that wins is generally the book that is read by the most people, which, unsurprisingly, in horror has a tendency to be Stephen King, and last year Stephen King won yet again. I think he's got like a ridiculous win rate in there. And I'll talk a bit about this because I did read the Stephen King short story collection. That's going to be the last book on the list. But when I initially conceptualized this video, all I wanted to do was read the 3 books that I had seen that came out last year on TikTok that were recommended to me. I'll talk about those as they come up because they were specifically recommended to me as a reader through the TikTok algorithm, and I think for the most part, the algorithm did a good job of picking which of the top books of last year I personally was going to really enjoy. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about when it came to the picks on here was whether or not I felt that they were, 1, horror, 2, good horror, like really good. Sometimes they tend to just be the next book out from a really popular horror author, so everybody is going to pick up a copy of those already. I did grab a couple of debuts that came out because I wanted to see if like those really shone. Well, initially I had thought of maybe doing the like top 5 of the year. The books that I had picked that TikTok had recommended to me were not all in the top 5, and I wanted to make sure that I was picking a diverse group of authors. You may note that in this video, if you've snuck ahead and looked at my little timestamps, if there was a particular book that you were looking for me to talk about, that today I am talking about 5 of the male authors in horror. I realized once I got a good way into this that I had picked mostly male authors, and because the list was surprisingly half male and half female when it came to the Goodreads Choice Awards, I want to make sure that I give the women of horror their own video, so that will be coming out soon. I'm like 20% of the way into that one, so that will hopefully come out before the 2025 Goodreads Choice Awards for horror come out. Will that happen? I don't know. I'm trying. This one obviously took 10 months to do, so you never know. It might come out next year at some point, but that is the goal. Today I'm here to talk about the men. Next time I will talk about the women. The first book that I read for this was one that was recommended to me on TikTok, and I think a lot of people had it recommended to them, and that was Incidents Around the House by Josh Malerman. If you haven't heard of this one, it follows a little girl named Bella who is being haunted by a creature that comes out of her closet at night, who she calls Other Mommy. Now, Other Mommy used to be her friend, but the longer that Other Mommy has been around, the more she has interacted with her. Other Mommy continues to pressure her and asks her to let Other Mommy into her heart. This then spirals because now Other Mommy is showing up places where she wouldn't normally be. She's becoming more and more aggressive about this, all the way up until Bella's parents become aware of the existence of Other Mommy, and what had already been a somewhat strained relationship then becomes more and more strained as the couple has to figure out how to protect their family. This is a well-known horror author, so I don't think that people were surprised to see Josh Malerman on that list. I was pleasantly surprised when I read this one. I have had middling feelings on much of Josh Malerman's backlist, what I have read. I ended up giving this one 5 stars, though. I loved it. If you enjoy a good monster horror, this is definitely one for you. He combines sort of the tropes of a child interacting with something horrific and monsters and haunted houses into one story that I really enjoyed. He used the trope of like the haunted house where what is actually haunted is the relationships. So that for much of this story, I wasn't entirely sure if there was a supernatural thing going on or if it was just the kid having sort of a reaction to the things that were going on with the adults in her life. But nope, it's supernatural. There is a monster, and I loved the way that this went through. Because you're in the head of a child, you definitely feel like there are things that she's reacting to that you aren't sure if it's just because she's a child and she's scared, or if she's not scared because she's a child, and most adults would have been scared in these situations. It's definitely an interesting one to pick up if you like that sort of writing style. I know some people don't particularly like reading books that are from the perspective of a child because the sentence structure is a bit iffy. I will say there were some times when I felt like the voice was a bit younger than the child actually was, but it didn't do that to an extent that bothered me so much that it would lower my enjoyment of the story. I really enjoyed this one. TikTok was right. It was one that I would enjoy, and it ended up being like pretty high up on the list. So yeah, definitely one that I highly recommend. The next one on the list was House of Bone and Rain by Gabino Iglesias. I was also recommended this one on TikTok. This is his sophomore novel, so it's the second one. This is a newer author and one that I had not heard of before. If you haven't heard of this one, it follows a group of 5 friends. They're now post high school, and one of them comes to the group and says that he wants to get vengeance for his mother, who was murdered at her work. All of the guys eventually do agree to help out because they have this motto within the group that if somebody fucks with one of them, they fuck with all of them. And so they get together in order to avenge the death of this woman. This does spiral out from there. There's things of gang violence and inequality on the island that get brought up, and all of this is set on the background of Hurricane Maria coming in, using both to their advantage and to their detriment the storm and the havoc that it creates in order to do some crimes. I believe this one is the lowest in the rankings when it comes to Goodreads Choice, at least in this video. Definitely, I don't know if overall for the series, but it was one of the ones that I had picked up initially for that video because TikTok did recommend it to me. I do follow this author on Blue Sky, and I am happy to have a Puerto Rican author to talk about and discuss, as it is still technically Latinx Heritage Month. Happy to recommend this one if you're looking for something that covers both the spooky and Latinx bends. Definitely one to pick up. Overall, I wound up giving this one 3.5 stars. It was not my favorite of the bunch. I understand why it was maybe a little bit lower in the rankings when it comes to Goodreads Choice. I do think it was also like less well read compared to the other ones. For me, my biggest complaint when it came to this one is possibly a spoiler for the book, and I don't want to spoil it for people who are interested in it. You don't want to be spoiled by this. Because my biggest complaint is a spoiler, I'm gonna have a little thing at the bottom. You can skip ahead to the next one, but I do want to talk about this briefly. I don't think that it would necessarily ruin a reading of this, but if you don't want to know anything going in, here's your chance to move along now that they're gone. My biggest complaint with this one was the fact that a supernatural element was introduced, and it felt kind of out of left field, at least for me. The early parts of this had a little bit of mysticism, a little bit of like, is the hurricane magic? Like, what other things are going on? And that felt okay. Like, things that seemed like a little bit spiritual were fine. But then at the end, the existence of the like mer people and how they were incorporated into this didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Like, it didn't feel like it was 100% incorporated, and it kind of split the book into 2 halves in a way, which is why I ended up giving it 3.5. It wasn't that I disliked the reading experience, it was just that it didn't feel cohesive and it didn't come together in a way that I felt was great. Some of the characters did also die off screen or off page. So we were watching characters react to those deaths, but we didn't really get to see it, and it kind of felt a little bit unemotional for me. Like, I didn't feel super attached to those characters as maybe the author would have wanted. But there were a lot of things in here that I really did enjoy. The writing style, the family, the culture, all of that was well done. And this is definitely an author that I'm going to want to keep reading more from and see what he comes up with in the future. The next book on my list was I Was a Teenage Slasher by Stephen Graham Jones. This was not one of the books that TikTok recommended to me, but it didn't need to be recommended to me because Stephen Graham Jones is one of my favorite horror authors at the moment. I think he's really one that's having a like a renaissance period right now. A lot of other people are coming into really enjoying Stephen Graham Jones' writing. I think The Only Good Indians really popped off for him, and he's had a couple other books, this one included, since then, that have kept his name sort of rotating in. He's been in the field for a very long time, and I have a feeling that The Buffalo Hunter, which is his release for 2025, has the ability to maybe actually outshine Stephen King this year when it comes to horror for 2025, but that's not this video. This one's all about last year. If you haven't heard of this one, I Was a Teenage Slasher takes place in 1989, following primarily Tolly and his best friend Amber. They are experiencing something very weird, specifically Tolly is, as they are both at a house party before school starts, the summer before their senior year. They experience something supernatural. A dead classmate who died in some sort of like hazing sort of ritual has come back to take vengeance on the people who he views as the cause of his death. He has become a slasher, and in the witnessing of this and in the kerfuffle, Tolly accidentally gets some of the slasher's blood mixed in with his blood, and now he too has become a teenage slasher. Tolly and Amber are trying to figure out how to prevent Tolly from continuing his murder spree as he goes on. The story itself is narrated from a Tolly of the future talking about the events that happened that summer as he was a kid. As the book goes on, it just becomes a, in my opinion, a wonderful slasher summer romp. I personally am a big fan of the slasher genre. This one for me is 5 stars. I loved it. Hell, I think out of all of the books on here, even though I did give Incidents Around the House 5 stars as well, I think this one is my favorite of the bunch. And if I had read all of these last year, it would be the one that I would vote for to win out of everything that I have read so far. I still have some more to read, but at least from what I have read, this would have been my pick. It's so hard to create an empathetic killer, and the way that Stephen Graham Jones makes the serial killer like an entity, like a vengeful spirit that takes over the body of these kids, really drives home sort of the goofiness and the structure within which these killers have to work and live. It very much reminded me of something like Scream or Cabin in the Woods, where it is both a commentary on the genre and just like a great example of it. So if you want something that's like definitely gory, definitely spooky, but is funny and like has those feelings of like a fun summer slasher flick, this is definitely one that I would recommend to you. We have reached the point in the video where I'm here to talk about the third and final book that I had initially planned to read for this before it expanded into a much larger project, but that is We Used to Live Here by Marcus Kliewer. This book came in second place and came like pretty darn close to beating out Stephen King, which honestly surprised me because this is a debut novel, but I think I know why. We Used to Live Here follows Charlie and Eve, who have recently purchased a fixer-upper that they plan to live in while they flip. They've done this a couple of times. While Eve is home alone, Charlie has gone to get some supplies in town. A family shows up at the door and says, hey, I, the dad, used to live here. I was just wondering if I could give my family a tour of the house where I grew up in. Eve has some issues with that, obviously being a woman alone in the middle of the woods, but she eventually lets them in just to walk around, except now the family won't leave, and things are going a little bit weird. I found out that this came from like a Reddit spooky post and then spiraled out from there. I think that this one got so much traction both on TikTok and just in the general world because it feels like House of Leaves, but in a much more accessible format. This definitely has bits of mixed media in there. There are some like ARG elements of like puzzles and things. There's certain little interlude chapters between the main story that each end in Morse code, and if you go through all the Morse code throughout the entire book, it gives you a little bit more lore on the sort of haunting that is happening in the story, let's say. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars, mostly because there were a couple of scenes that I, in particular, felt like they were trying to scare me. In the way that if you were to walk through a haunted house with the lights on, you could see the scaffolding and wires and the ways in which the scares are being put into place in order to scare you, and then thus loses its fear factor a little bit. I don't think that everybody would have that, but as a person who reads a lot of horror, I definitely sort of saw the scaffolding behind some of these scares, which took me out of the story. Now, from a debut perspective, totally, I understand that, like, the first full-length novel that somebody is putting out there, it might just be, like, learning pains, a little bit of stumbling there. This is definitely an author that I would be willing to read from again. Definitely interesting, and it has like a cult following that I totally understand why they are the way they are. The twists in this one were great, and there were definitely a bunch of scenes that were super action-packed, and I could see how they could have somebody on the edge of their seat. This wasn't like a particularly gory horror. It was much more atmospheric and psychological and mysterious, and I could see how people who maybe don't normally read horror might have picked this one up and really enjoyed it. It felt like an action horror in a lot of ways, which I think is a bit more palatable to some people. It's not gross out or splatterpunk, anything like that. So it's definitely one that I could see why it would appeal to a wider audience than just your traditional horror audience, which I think may also be why it is picking up steam. And those mixed media elements and ARG elements also definitely appeal to certain people, especially that whole TikTok crowd that really enjoys postmodernist literature like House of Leaves. We've come to the point where we're at the final book that I read that took me the longest to read, and that is You Like It Darker by Stephen King, which is the winner of the 2024 Goodreads Choice Awards. When it comes to Stephen King, again, I am not surprised that King won this one, just because there are so many people who don't normally read horror who will pick up Stephen King. There is also just the name recognition, so that people who maybe didn't read anything at all in the category can at least go, oh, Stephen King, I'll vote for him, even if they haven't read anything, because I do know there's plenty of folks who just vote in every category, even if they haven't read anything in there, and King is an easy pick for that, so totally not surprised. 1, giant readership, 2, name recognition. It makes sense for the popularity award that the Goodreads Choice Awards are. This is a collection of short stories, and if you've followed me for any time on the channel, I'm almost always a big fan of Stephen King's short stories. Generally, if people are looking for something to start with King, a lot of folks will throw some of his like big, like heavy-hitting novels at folks, and I'm always going to be a person who says, hey, maybe pick up one of his short story collections, see if you jive with his writing style before you jump into something like It or any of these big 1,000-page novels that he writes, because if you don't jive with the writing style, it's going to be really hard to get through something that large without it. This is not my favorite of his short story collections. I still think that out of all of them, my favorite is still Skeleton Key. So if you're looking for a recommendation from me, that would be Skeleton Key. But there were, I don't know if you can see them, there's some flags in here because there were a couple of 5-star stories in this one. I was talking with Isaac, my partner, while I was going through this, and why I felt like I was dragging my feet so much when reading it. And I think this is true of almost all of King's writings in that he has 5-star capability. There are 5-star stories in here that I absolutely loved, but it's surrounded by a bunch of 3-star stories. So it's like passable, fine, good stories, good twists. Like I was there, I enjoyed it. Nothing really to write home about. And then you get one that is like so atmospheric, so interesting. What an interesting topic. As you're going through them, you know, like that, there's lines that stick out in your head. And that's just true of Stephen King's writing, is he has so much of it, and there's little spots of bright light throughout his canon, but there's just a lot of like really passable fine fiction. And that's a good commercial artist, a good commercial writer is able to create consistent good writing, but it isn't necessarily like the best writing ever, so on and so forth. The other thing that I want to say is that most of the stories in here were not what I would call horror. There was some thriller, there were mysteries, there was sci-fi, speculative ones, but for the most part, this isn't a horror book. It's just a speculative writer's short stories. And I know that we put King in horror because most of his canon is horror, but he does a lot of stuff that isn't horror at all. The hard part is that it doesn't fit well into one genre, and therefore, like, would you put it in general fiction when it's not like a general fiction title, but it covers a wide variety? Maybe with mystery and thriller, it would have made sense in that category because I feel like most of them sort of fit there. And I think really the stories that shine the most in here were mystery stories, so maybe that would make more sense. It just feels like the others were all definitely horror books, and this one just felt like a sci-fi speculative mystery collection. And again, that might be why it won, because it appeals to a wide variety of readers, not just horror readers, but people who read general fiction, people who read mystery, thriller, sci-fi, so on and so forth. And again, Stephen King, so name recognition there. But yeah, 3.5 I think is what my rating is here. My favorite story in here follows a man who has a dream where he dreams up the location of a dead body and it won't leave his head. He winds up finding where that location was from his dream, and when he goes there, the dead body's actually there, so he tries to call in an anonymous tip to say, hey, there's a dead body here. Unfortunately for him, that then causes some issues in his life where a detective thinks that he definitely did the crime, and it's his conscience that made him call in and say this is where he left the body when he didn't. He just had a dream. So you're following the two characters back and forth for like a good chunk of this book. One who knows he's innocent and just had one weird freak premonition, which nobody believes because he doesn't have a history of psychic anything. And the detective who is obsessed with nailing him for the crime that he's fairly certain that this man did. That story was great. On its own, like, that would have held up. It was like novella length. If you're gonna ask me like which one of these stories would turn into a movie at some point in the future, that one definitely has potential there. And I think out of all of them, that was my favorite. There's also stories that involve aliens in here, stories that involve weird interactions with people that give you premonitions and answers about the future or your life. There's all sorts of things going on in here that are definitely worth looking at. But again, not my favorite of King's. Like, if you're looking for one King to pick up, this maybe isn't the one to hook you. But if you're already a fan of King's work, it's definitely more of that. Maybe grab a copy from the library rather than buying a physical copy. Or the audiobook, I will say, great. The narrator did an awesome job, so that's also an option for you if you're an audiobook reader. Those were hopefully some helpful little mini reviews of books that, in theory, most of those are now out in paperback that you could go grab copies for, or perhaps are no longer like the top of the library holds list because they came out last year. And hopefully, so you can find something in there that you find enjoyable, that you want to read. Obviously, I am a big horror fan, so I'm reading them year-round. But, you know, if you are just a spooky season reader, hopefully there was something in there that appeals to you. I feel like I read, like, a good wide variety of stories. When it comes to the rest of the list, I'm gonna put myself over to the side here. There were 20 books in that list. Obviously, I talked about 5 of them today. there's 5 that I really had no interest in at all. And then there are the ones that I have already read. All of those have check marks there. Some of them I will be talking about next time, which should make sense because I said that I would be talking about the women in horror next time. Gretchen and I have also already done a joint review where we talked about Chuck Tingle's Bury Your Gaze, so I wasn't going to talk about this one here, but if you want to hear our thoughts on that one, you can go and watch that video there. I have 2 books that are on hold at the library that I'm waiting to come in. One that I have borrowed from the library that I'm going to listen to, and 4 more that I own copies of that I may read for this or I may not. I have yet to decide. It depends on how those library holds come through, and which ones I'm feeling like reading. Some of them I have plans for their own sort of videos and things as well. So, if you have any particular ones in there that you want me to read, I am still grabbing some of those for the Women in Horror video of last year. Or if you want to just hear my thoughts about anyone in particular, just let me know and I will look into grabbing a copy, whether it be from the library or physically or audiobook or what have you. I'm reading horror all the time, and I will talk to you again soon. Is that next book coming out next week? No. But hopefully before the Goodreads Choice Awards for 2025, because I want to also look at those. I've been picking up throughout the year authors and books that I think might show up on that list. So maybe I do a predictions for what's going to be on the list video, and then a reaction to what actually is there. That might be fun. And then maybe I can do a more timely talking about some of the 2025 picks, because I have actually stayed on top of it this year for once. So here we go. Let's talk about horror books in the comments. Did you read any of these? Was I wrong on my opinions on any of them? Were there any books that weren't on that list from last year that you think I should pick up that I may have not heard of or didn't have available to me? Please leave me recommendations down below, because again, horror is my bread and butter. It's where I like to live. It's my favorite thing. And outside of that, I will talk to you again soon. Bye.